This is Gonzalo Garcia at Agency One. Our webinar today is B.O.S. Part 2. B.O.S. is Business Owner Solution Systems. And our speaker today is Mark Berry, who's Variable Life Vice President at John Hancock. We're thrilled to have you back, Mark, for our second go-around on this. The last one was great, well attended, and we are thrilled to hear the follow-up to that session. Mark has been with Hancock for a while, was brought in to, he's a 20-year veteran, was brought in to really run the variable life solutions within John Hancock, but he does an awful lot. Probably one of the best storytellers in the industry. So we're thrilled to have you back, Mark. The floor is yours.
Well, with an intro like that, Gonzalo, all I can do is go downhill from here. So
You're good.
I
You're
appreciate
good.
that. Just to make sure, stick with me just a moment. Do we have the nice blue screen going there, Gonzalo? You see it
Yes, sir,
okay?
we do. Yep.
All right, very good. Well, thank you again for this opportunity. It does mean a lot to us. And thank you to everybody that's attending. For those of you that saw the first one, and this is a four-part series. The first one, as you recall, we really focused on the business owner when it came to their employees and the importance of having some good planning discussions around that. And today we're going to focus on the partners. And so, the way I do this is each time I just like to go back through the napkin presentation part of this just to get a refresh of kind of where we are. Again, the idea is you take a blank piece of paper and you draw a circle and you put this business owner, the boss, right there in the middle of it. And you explain to them that what we want to do is have a discussion about their universe, right? Because they have a lot going on. And you may recall the cheesy acronym that I came up with for this too is Business Owner Solution System. It's important because the idea here again is this is not a sales pitch per se. This is really intended to be a conversation with a business owner. And so, just to go through them real quick, these are the four main areas. Top of mind is for those of you that dialed in last week are the employees. We talked a lot about them. Today, we're going to focus here on the partners. But just as a refresh, there's also the next time we get together, it will be about the family. And then the final one will be about their heirs. So, each of these groups of people can create some unique opportunities. And so, again, today, what we'll focus on is the partners, and it's one of those interesting conversations you can have with partners. Probably some of my most fun memories as a planner is talking to business partners about this because I got to know some of these guys and they were a lot of fun and you can have some fun with them. But one of the things I said to a couple of partners, and maybe it was cruel, but I said to them, I said, one day one of you is going to go to the funeral of the other, and at that funeral, you're going to meet your new partner. And it's fun to watch the reaction to that. It took them a couple of minutes, really. They looked at each other, they looked at me, and finally, one of them blurted out something like, I couldn't work with his wife, or something, and they laughed about it. But the point was is that I knew that these two partners had not done any planning. There was nothing. And so it really kind of hit home with them. And that's where I really brought up this idea of what typically happens with partners is you're either going to buy the partner out or you're going to sell to them, right? And there's others, but this is the big one. And this is really where that discussion or the idea behind buy sell agreements comes into play. Many of you have worked with buy sell agreements. You know this structure and how they work. We're going to talk about them a little bit because what I want to do, even for those of you that are experts in this, is let's back up a little bit and forget all that we know because we know a lot and kind of get back into talking about it at the level of someone that's not in our industry, right? To help them understand what the heck this is all about, this buy sell thing, right? And so you can explain it to them, right? The idea, of course, is that there's an agreement between these two partners that, hey, if one of them were to predecease the other, that there's two really important features of a buy sell agreement. The first feature is that the surviving partner is protected because their new partner isn't going to be the spouse. Legally, this document says the estate has to sell that business to them, right? So they can't, the surviving spouse can't try to become a partner. We've got this agreement. So it protects the surviving partner, but it's also protecting the estate. And this is where the surviving partner has to really come to grips with this idea of, hey, you've also agreed, though, that if something happens to them, you're going to buy their part of the business, right? And so that's really, I think, where this discussion becomes important is to understand first the importance of the buy sell, but also understand the importance of what it is they're agreeing to. And that becomes critical. And so the example I always like to use is we're just going to use these two executives here. We'll call them executives, exec one, exec two. These are basically business partners. One is age 45 and one is age 48. So they come into this agreement and they kind of get this idea of this buy sell agreement. And so for those of you that tuned in a couple of weeks ago, you might remember this unique mortality table that I showed. And what it was is it shows the odds of living to age 65. So you can take any person, whatever age they are, and you put in their gender, and you can show from this table their odds of making it to age 65. This is just pure mortality. It has nothing to do with whether they bungee jump or not, right? And so you could do that, but what you can also do is use this table for partners, and it's really powerful when you're talking about more than one person because you get to do some unique things here. So let me show you an example. So exec one is age 45, 45-year-old male, okay? And so according to this table, there's a 93.04% chance that he will live to age 65. Those are good odds, right? That's good. Exec 2 is even better. He's a little closer to 65, so there's a 93.57% chance, right? So what's the point here? Well, if you're talking about a buy-sell agreement, what the agreement says is only one of them passes. So in other words, what this table can do for you is say, what are the odds of both of these gentlemen making it to age 65? And it's really interesting because, and I'm not saying every partnership dissolves at age 65 either. That's not the point. But just really to give them this moment in time to say, hey, just looking forward, just to make it to 65, here's the odds of both of you making it, right? And what you do is you take those two percentages, you multiply them together and you get a new number. And the beauty of percentages is when you multiply them together, the answer is always smaller, right? So in this example, what you have now, as you can see there's an 87.06% chance that both of them will make it to 65. Now that still sounds pretty good, but look at it another way. What that also means then is that there's almost a 13% chance that one of them will not make it to 65. Now, if you talk in Vegas terms, they always like to say the odds of or out of. What this means is there's a 1 in 8 chance that these two gentlemen will use this buy-sell agreement prior to age 65. That's really telling, and I think sometimes some information like this, although it may seem morbid, can help with that sense of urgency. What I will tell you too is if you take three people and you multiply them all together, the number gets even smaller. So the message here is the bigger the partnership, the bigger the chance they're probably going to use that all important buy sell agreement. So that's important, right? So that's the first thing. And so what we talk about is how do you do these buy sell agreements? What does it mean to do that? And so the most basic form is the cross purchase agreement. And so I'm going to say Wayne and I are partners together in this business. And what cross purchase means simply is that I own a policy on Wayne's life and he owns a policy on my life. And so if one of us were predeceased the other, the death benefit will go to the surviving partner. And I want to show you this to you graphically in a moment because if you think about it, to do that, that only took two policies. That's pretty cool. So let's look at this. So this is another example. You've got two business partners doing this. And so there's a policy on partner one, and the death benefit check would go to partner two if they pass, and vice versa, right? There's where the cross comes in. I just graphically, it's fun sometimes to see where it crosses. This is why we call it a cross purchase agreement. And again, what's nice in this structure is that it only takes two policies to do that. One owns policy and one owns one on the other. But there's also some really important features of cross purchase that if it does transact, it really gives it some great advantages. The first one I want to mention is that if they do pass, right? And you've got this situation where now there's an estate. Okay, and that's really what we're saying is so the partner has passed away. Now you have the estate. That death benefit check is going to go directly to the surviving partner who's simply going to write that check to the estate. So they got an income tax free death benefit check right when they needed it, and they're able to write this check to the estate, who in turn then will give them the deed to half of the business that they need, right? So that is a great simple transaction, but there's two things also that I just don't want you to lose track of that also happen here. And I think business partners like hearing these things, right? When it comes to the pros of this. The first one is that this surviving partner just got a really nice step up in basis. The chances are the business is worth more than they put into it, their basis in the original sense of it. So let's say they started in a garage $1,000 each, and it's worth $1 million today. Well, the basis was only $2,000. If they tried to sell that business, the capital gains would be substantial, capital gains tax. But if you look at this transaction, chances are this transaction changed a lot of that because let's say it was $500,000 to buy half the business. Now the basis for half the business is $500,000. So if this surviving partner now sells the business, really a substantially less amount of capital gains exposure that they would have. So the step up in basis is a great story to tell partners about. So don't lose track of that. But the other one I think is probably even more important, and this is a big one, is that this transaction was also creditor protected. And if you look at my simple little drawing here, the reason that's the case is that that death benefit check and that policy didn't go to the business. It went directly to the partner. It bypassed the business. And so the business is going to have creditors going after the business, yes, but they cannot get at this check. It is creditor protected. Really powerful stories. And it just makes this whole the life insurance structure here around this thing with buy sells. It's a perfect match for that buy sell structure. Now, what are the negatives here to this cross purchase idea? It's a couple of them, and they're worth talking about. So, what are the cons to this? The first one is that originally there could be a cost inequity. That's an example. Say the two partners is a big age difference. And so one partner might have to pay substantially more for a policy on their partner. So there could be a cost inequity from his age. Could be a health issue too, right? So that's one thing. The other one, though, I think that's even bigger is that as you add more partners, the policy number starts to go up significantly, right? So that's really the other issue here. And I'll give you an example. So let's go back to our two partner structure. And again, to do this, it took two policies. They owned one on each other. But if you add a third partner, this is where the multiplier effect starts to come in, and this is where this thing starts to fall apart just a little bit. It's not awful at three, but I just want to show you graphically how messy this starts to get because you add the third partner now, they're still doing a cross purchase agreement. Well, how do they do that with three people? Well, the first thing is this new partner has to buy a policy on both of the existing partners, right? They got to do that. And, or a part policy on them for the other partners, the death benefit is going to go to those partners and vice versa. He's got to purchase a policy. I mean, you can see how this works, right? Now you've got several crosses going on here, a lot of cross purchasing going on, but each partner in essence has to own a policy on both of the other partners. And so you end up with this math equation that starts to happen. And the math is this that to do a cross purchase agreement with life insurance like this, the math is the number of partners times the number of partners minus one. So in this example, three partners, three times two is six policies, is what it would take. Let's say you have five partners, five times four is 20 policies. Now, would Wayne and I love to sell you 20 policies? Absolutely, all day long. But that's where it becomes an issue. I think what I've seen at least is that you get past three partners, this cross purchase thing starts to become an issue with just the sheer number of policies that have to be managed. And so, what do you do about that? Well, there's this idea of entity purchase. Okay, so that was the classic way to do this. They would simply say, well, okay, instead of cross purchase, where every partner owns policies on the other, let's simply have the business own one policy on the three partners, which is beautiful in a sense, right? Much simpler. You look at this compared to what I just showed you, graphically speaking, this is a much simpler structure, right? So the business would simply own a policy on each of the partners. Many of you know the fallacy of this already, but I'll go ahead and share with you what the issue here is a couple of things. First of all, the pros are you do get one policy per owner, and that's great. That's why they would do this. So that's nice. The other one, though, and it's kind of nice in some respects, is that the premiums can be spread evenly now. Because if we're letting the business buy these policies, then each of the partners isn't as concerned about cost inequity, right? If there's an age gap or a health issue, something like that, it's not as big of a deal because the business is, in essence, buying all the policies. So that solves a couple of things there. The cons are significant, though. The first one is there is no step up in basis in this transaction. So if the one partner does pass, the other partners aren't buying their shares directly, the business is doing it. So it's almost like a stock redemption. You don't get a step up in basis in that transaction. The bigger one, this one's big too. They're both big. No creditor protection here because the death benefit check went to the business. So creditors can come after that money, right? And that could be a negative to some businesses depending on the type of business they are. That's a big one. But there's another big one here. Many of you have heard of this by now, the Conley case. And we're not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm going to assume most of you have heard of the Conley case. But I think what made all the tax nerds and estate planning nerds all excited about the Conley case was that here you had a tax case basically that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. So it was a lot of fun, right, for people that are in the business. But what Conley did is it really woke everybody up a little bit about this two things. One, of course, on the surface, it kind of killed the entity plan, right? Because everybody thinks, well, this means entity purchase won't work. What we're hearing, at least from our advanced markets people, is that's not exactly what happened. What really happened, and I think the most important part of the Conley case is that there was no follow-up. They did the planning, they set up their entity purchase, but then they never followed their own plan. And I think the courts looked at that and they said, you really set this thing up and there was no follow-up. You didn't do exactly what you said you were going to do. Therefore, all bets are off and it kind of blew up. But it is interesting because I think it really has opened up people's eyes to this, what a buy sell is. And also this idea of an entity purchase has become kind of an issue. And so how do what's the answer there? Well, simply it's known as an insurance LLC. This is a strategy now that our advanced markets people, I believe, are seeing quite a bit now, is this idea, okay, instead of entity, let's set up an LLC. So just graphically speaking, again, to show you how this works is there's the entity purchase. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take these policies out and not have the entity own it anymore and let this LLC own these policies. So what you get here then is really the best of all worlds in a sense, right? The pros of this are pretty substantial, of course, is at first you once again get the step up in basis. So that's a great story right there. You do also reclaim that idea of creditor protection, and it's one policy per owner, right? So you kind of think, well, that's the best of all worlds is to do that. There's a couple of things to keep in mind with insurance LLCs. They're not awful, but first of all, it does require some legal help to set this up, right? So you do need to get services of competent attorney, set up the LLC, some things like that. And the second thing is not only must the entity be created, but going back to the Conley case, it's got to be maintained. So you really have to kind of have someone keeping an eye on this thing, managing it, making sure it's all there's following all the rules and things that they said to do. So again, they're not awful, but they're there. What I would tell you is you're not going to get into all this in a napkin presentation in 5 minutes with a piece of paper and a pencil. But the reason I go through this is to arm all of us with this preconceived knowledge that whatever comes up in the meeting, the answer is yes. In other words, is there a way to do that? There probably is, right? There's a way to structure that. So the other one I want to mention just real quick that comes up sometimes too, and not to forget about it, is cross endorsement. And so this is the thought that instead of having to go get new policies, you might have two business partners that already have policies on their own lives. They could simply use some of those policies to endorse toward the buy sell agreement. So you might have situations, for example, where one of the partners is uninsurable. Well, how do you do that then? What are you going to do? Well, go see if there's some existing policies. And we're going to talk the next time about policy review, but this is a great opportunity to kind of preset the stage that policy review might be important to see if a policy exists where they could simply endorse a part of that existing policy over to satisfy the buy sell agreement. The other thing I would say here, the beauty of this is that this is very portable because each owner can own their own policy on their own lives and then endorse it over and solve this issue of the buy sell. And then if does something does happen to the business and they split, they've at least got their own policies and all that. So that's great. So, this is going to be a very interesting chart. Hard to tell this story graphically, but I want to show it to you because I think this kind of tells that story the best I could do. You've got the two executives again, right? And this time they're going to do this endorsement thing. And let's say it's a significant buy sell agreement. So $10 million, dollars, right? So this executive one, age 45, simply endorses death benefit from an existing policy toward the idea of this buy sell agreement. And that sounds great on the surface. The problem is, if nothing else is done here, that becomes almost like a gift and it becomes a taxable situation. So, to solve that, what Executive 2 does is they pay a rental charge on this. And basically, it's the alternative term rate, the 1 year term rate for that year, okay, for that $10 million. dollars. So in this example, executive two would then turn around and write a check to executive one for $5,900, in essence, renting this policy, and that kind of cleans up some of that potential tax situation. And then vice versa, we're going to do the same thing. So exec two is going to do the exact same thing, and they're a little bit older, so their rental payment in this example is a little bit higher. But if you look at this, for $5,900 or even $7,000, you've got $10 million dollars of coverage. That's significant leverage here. It's a great play for both of them. And so that's really how this endorsement plan works. Now, the issue with endorsement, to keep in mind, this is year one because we're using the alternative term rates each year, of course, that's going to go up. So I'm just going to show you an example of year 10. So this is year one. By the time they get to year 10, you can see the numbers have gone up quite a bit. But again, still a significant leverage play really for both of those. So that's really the idea of those, is to really look at all the different ways that these can be done. So I always like to end with these, as you probably know from the first one, with what I call three basic questions. And I'm not saying I'm smarter than the person I'm asking the question to, but what I also don't want to do is use the lingo that they may not understand, right? So I don't use life insurance words. I use very simple words and try to keep it, in their world. And so the first one is, and this actually happened. This was a fun one. I'm sitting with two partners at a lunch. The third partner wasn't there yet. And so we're waiting for him. And finally, they said, well, let's just get started. And so we ordered some food. And I just asked him this question. I said, do you have a buy sell agreement? You just ask that question. And what's the key here is that you can't answer it for them. It's really hard for salespeople, I could tell you, especially for me, as you could probably tell, to just shut up and listen, right? And give them a chance to answer. It was really hard. But I would tell you here, the first one to speak loses here. So just ask that question, throw it out there for the partners, give them the chance to answer this. It was really interesting, though, with these two particular gentlemen because they both looked at each other and then they looked at me for help, like I'm supposed to answer it for them. And they looked at each other again. And finally, and I'm not going to give you his real name, let's say it was Hank. Hank, the third guy, wasn't there yet. They said, well, Hank will know, right? Well, I thought that was funny. It was like, well, I asked it a second way. I said, do you remember signing something? I was trying to prep them through this, right? And finally, what ended up happening, I think, is maybe because I kept prodding, I think they felt like they had to say yes because they did finally, both of them looked at me finally and go, yeah, we, pretty sure we have a buy-sell agreement. Okay, good. So we set the stage then for, I think, the best question in this whole pile, which is question two, right? So question one, do you have a buy-sell? Get the affirmative if you can. If it's no, there's your planning opportunity right there. Sit down with them. But most time you'll get this. Yeah, I have a buy-sell agreement. Here's question two, and man, it's a doozy. How's it funded? Yeah, and again, stop and let them soak this up. And man, I got to tell you, it was kind of cruel for these guys because the look in their eyes, because I just let it seep in and the deer in the headlights look. And finally, one of them did ask me, he said, well, okay, so what do you mean by funded? And so, I went back to the structure of what buy sell agreements are. And, in this example, I think their business is worth $3 million. Let's make it an easy number. It was a good business. I said, so what this means is, in other words, let's say Hank, who isn't here, and Hank never showed up, by the way, let's say Hank just perished in a car wreck just now while we're here at lunch. You owe his estate $1 million. If I understand what you guys are saying, I said, where do you have that? I mean, do you have that in a bank account somewhere? How are you going to get $1 million? Because you can't sell it a third of the business. And man, that was just, they stopped eating then. I don't think they ate the rest of the meal because Hank wasn't there. Matter of fact, one of them, he tried calling Hank, he didn't answer, right? So it was really, it was kind of cruel, but it really hit home. By the way, Hank was fine. Everybody was okay. But it really sets up this idea of just asking really simple questions and the power of those simple questions. So that was the second one. What I would say is sometimes you're going to have partners that get past these two. They're going to say, yeah, we have a buy sell. And yes, we have life insurance, just like you would tell us to do, right? We have a great agent, whatever it is. The third question I think is also just as important. And this goes back to that Conley thing, right? When was the last time you reviewed it? Okay, because most of them set it up, they sign it, they might do the policies, and they put it in a file, and they go about doing what their business does. And their business doesn't review policies, right? That's your job, that's my job, that's our job. That's why they need us to help them because we can certainly do that, right? And so when was the last time it was reviewed? Ideally, you'd want to look at it annually for a growing business. I would say that's really tough for most businesses. I would say at a minimum every 3 years. If you could put a tickler system in or something. I mean, again, I would encourage, reminding them each year, let's do an annual review, especially a business that's growing substantially, right? You might have an underfunded buy sell at some point if the business continues to really grow. This is where I would point out my shameless plug for John Hancock and Wayne Baldwin is that you have available to you our team of people. We have legal specialists and we have attorneys on staff that will charge you zero per hour to help you review things like this. So if you can get a buy sell document and if you don't have someone available, certainly that's something that where Wayne can step in and really help you with something like that. And so that's really, again, the idea is that, sit down with them, have this discussion, ask a few simple questions, and then, let's really see where it goes. And so I guess this is the idea of kind of wrapping this up is that embracing the business owner holistically and looking at all aspects of their lives. And so again, last week we talked about the employees, how important that was. And as you heard today, this is about the partners. So more to come on this. But I guess at this point, Gonzalo, I'm going to turn this back over to you and let you wrap it up from here.
Well, Mark, thank you for that. I will remind everybody that if you have any questions for Mark, to please post them in the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. And while people are thinking about any questions they may have, I've got a few myself, Mark. So um, when you ask the question, do you have a buy-sell agreement? And they look at each other and they remember signing something. And a lot of times what they've signed is their operating agreement, which has some provisions for buy sell, but is not really a buy sell agreement. How do you differentiate those two, and how do you talk to the business owners about the difference between an operating agreement and a buy sell agreement?
Yeah, and I think that's such a great question. And I don't want to be oversimplified with this, Gonzalo, but to me, it's like just get me what you've signed then, and let's take a look. I've got a team
Right.
of people that can take a look at all the stuff you've signed, and we can help you unpack this, right? Because you're right. It could be, they probably signed a lot of things, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
think about setting up whatever the business entity was and whatever else, there's probably many things. And so I think the key here at this meeting is don't get bogged down in any of the weeds or the minutia. What you got to keep it at this level is, hey, I'm not sure what it could be, but you know what? Why don't you get me those documents? Let's just take a look, right? That's what we're
Yeah.
setting up. So to your point, it could be a lot of things, and it's a
Yeah.
great point you
Yeah.
bring up there. Yeah.
So, and on another, I've got another question is, and because I've seen it, you guys have, John Hancock has a very well thought out decision tree on Connolly and on buy sell reviews. Can you just talk, or maybe Wayne wants to talk a little bit about that? Because that's certainly something that we can make available to other participants of the call. If you want that document to talk about buy sell reviews, please just let Danielle or Lisa know, or us know, or Kathy know. But can you talk about that document, kind of that process a little bit?
Yeah, Wayne, do you want to talk that through, or you want that one?
No, go for it.
Yeah. So
No, you can.
okay, well, so to your point, Gonzalo, yes, our advanced markets team, I'm newer to this company. Wayne's been with the company substantially longer, but when I came into the company, I actually was very, very pleasantly surprised at the plethora of information. I know it's a big word for me, but really a lot of information, a lot of work that our advanced markets team has done to really make this something powerful where we can help you. That's our point. That's why we're here. And that's why they're here. That's why they exist. And so, yes, to your point, Wayne can get you a lot of these pieces that are available, whether it be buy sell agreements or entity purchase or corporate structures, right? All kinds of information like that. And again, I would say that the other thing that Wayne can bring to the table is the idea that he can get somebody on the phone with you, literally, and do that, right, Wayne? I mean, you could literally get someone on the phone and even have a good
Yeah.
conversation with them as
Yeah.
well.
I mean, you can send an email to Gonzalo and myself and just give us the basic profile of the case. This is where we are. This is who these people are. And then what I would do, then I would send it out to one of our attorneys and have he or she, one of the attorneys, take review what you had sent in this email. And typically they come back with a question or two that you didn't think to ask
Mhm.
or put on the email. And then what we would do once that is done, we set up a phone call with the attorney. Gonzalo can be on there. I usually like to be on there because I always want to contribute something, but I also learn something every time. And that's the best way to handle it because then we're not hitting, but approaching the our attorney without them having any knowledge of the case. It gives them an opportunity. And quite frankly, a lot of times behind the scenes, they're sharing the information with maybe one of the other attorneys and saying, here's the direction I'm going. What do you think? So you get multiple.
Yeah. I think Wayne froze.
Yeah,
Wayne?
we froze him up there, Gonzalo. But yeah, I
Yep.
think he answered that well, right?
Yeah,
Whatever we
no,
can do to help you
absolutely.
with
And
it.
and
Yeah.
again, there's a whole microsite with that document and a bunch of other documents on buy-sell agreements that is really critical and I think would be incredibly useful to all the folks on this. So we'll Danielle, just make a note so that we can send that out. The last thing I wanted to comment in light of no questions from the audience, one other thing that, and you talked about the cross endorsement buy sell. I absolutely love that strategy. Um, there's another thing that's really important, I don't think that you did mention, and it's oh, I do have one question here. I'll get to that in a second, Mitch. Um, the great thing about alternative term rates, so that quote unquote rental fee that you talked about, when you have a 62-year-old and a 48-year-old, you always have those price discrepancies, right? I'm paying my own premiums. So it doesn't really matter to my 48-year-old super preferred partner that she doesn't have to pay that really high premium on a 63-year-old male. Um, the beauty of alternative term rates is they're not rated. So if I was also table 4 on top of being older, it's the same rental price, right? It doesn't really matter. The health issues are on me, not on my partner.
That is
So,
such a great point, Gonzalo.
yeah,
And I'm glad you brought that up because I'm stealing that because I like what you just said. It's one of those things where I think we all knew it, but until you articulate it like that, that's
yeah.
another really important feature of how we can structure this, right? Is you do get around a lot of that other stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Excellent, excellent
Why
point.
am I paying for my older partner's insurance who doesn't take care of himself as is table four? That doesn't seem really fair to a 48-year-old junior partner. So
And on
I
that
was,
point too, before we get to the other question, uh, as I mentioned before, the other beauty of that, Gonzalo, is that not only do they own their own policies, but they can have those living benefit riders on their
Mhm.
own policies
Yep.
and access those for their use, right? And so that's really the other thing is it's portable, but it also allows them to maintain the living benefit riders for their own use. If
Yep.
they do have a chronic illness or a long-term care rider or what critical illness,
Absolutely.
whatever those are out there. So yeah, but that's a brilliant point I think you bring up, and I think it's a good one for people to
Right.
realize as well.
And you can incorporate that into your pros on the next version of
I'm
the
stealing
slide.
it, totally stealing
Um,
it.
so we do have a question from Mitch Ostrov. LLC structure question mark. So I presume, Mitch, what you mean by that is can we describe a little further the LLC? And I don't know if you want to pop that slide back up again, Mark, but kind of maybe just kind of describe what the LLC does as a owner of policies so you get the benefits of the entity purchase. So you don't have a bunch of policies if you have three or four partners, but you also have some of the creditor protection and some of the other things that you mentioned. I think you're a couple slides back from
Yeah,
that.
let me get there right here, I
Yep,
believe.
there you
Uh,
go.
and I will admit right up front, I am not the LLC expert. We certainly
Yep.
have people that are. But again, the
Mark, I'm
idea,
sorry to interrupt you. Some clarification on the question is how do they handle the death of one? So one party dies.
ah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, and you
clear.
know
Thank you,
this one
Mitch.
too, Gonzalo. I know you do, but generally speaking, what happens here is the death benefit because the LLC basically is the owner of the policy. The death benefit goes to the LLC,
Yep.
and then the LLC writes the check to the estate,
Right.
and so that and I don't know, Gonzalo, if you want to add to that, but that's really
Yeah,
how you
no,
keep
I
it.
mean it completes the funding of the buy-sell agreement, and it does give them the step up in basis because you're dealing with LLC and passive entity laws and so on and so forth relative to the purchase of the
Right.
share. So it all kind of flows back into the LLC, and it's not at the actual entity level.
Well, and
Um,
that's where the creditor protection it
yeah,
maintains that, right? It gets that it maintains that step up in basis as well. So it really is. There's no such thing as a no-brainer. I mean, it's not fair, but it's a beautiful solution,
yeah.
I think, to entity purchase
And
for sure.
Mitch, if you've got further questions on that, we can get one of the advanced markets
Hmm.
attorneys from John Hancock on the phone with you one-on-one and make sure that we take care of any additional questions. And there's a bunch of material on this as well. So
Yeah.
a bunch of really good material that Hancock has put together.
Well, I can
So
tell you
Mitch,
too,
thank
as
you
you
for that
know,
question.
I'm sorry, Gonzalo, as you know, I was going to say our people love to talk about this stuff too.
Yep.
So, anytime you want to get somebody, they'd love to have that discussion with you as well.
They do, and they're good at it. All right, so I don't think we've got any
Well,
more questions.
let
I'll
me
tell
make one
Wayne.
comment.
Yeah, go ahead,
Let me
Wayne.
make one comment
Yep.
regarding the cross endorsement. Sorry, I lost connection there for a while.
Okay.
One of the things I like about the cross endorsement is it lends itself to the owners buying permanent insurance
Mhm.
because all too often what happens is they look at it as a period of time till retirement. And that lends itself to term, a 15 or 20-year term or whatever. However, if Mark and I are partners, like you said, the other benefit is I'm slightly older than Mark.
Not much,
And
Wayne.
so I'm buying a policy on my own life at the rates that I should be paying. Mark is buying a policy on his life at the rates he should be paying. I can pick VUL, variable life. Mark actually probably would pick variable life since he's the VP of variable life. But I might pick an IUL or whatever. And I can choose what I like. I can pick my own segment. It's my decision. I'm endorsing the death benefit over time. When I retire, the endorsement is torn up, and now I own my own policy that I picked and chose beyond retirement, beyond what we're talking about here, the buy sell. And so it lends itself to a permanent sale, which is good for all of us, but it's also, in my opinion, good for the clients. It gets them to think about beyond retirement. So just a plug
Yeah,
for the
and
cross endorsement I
to
did.
that point, Wayne, it's, one partner can max fund it, the other partner can minimum fund it for protection.
Yep.
You've got, Mark mentioned earlier, I think when you got knocked off the call, you have the availability of all the chronic illness riders, long-term care riders, and anything else that inure to the owner of the policy. So, great solutions there. You wanted to add something
And
to that?
what's nice about it, Mark and I don't have to agree on anything except for the death benefit amount.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yep.
So that you'll get to the end result quicker, in my
Great.
opinion. So
Great.
just a thought.
Okay, we're winding up here. Any final questions? Type it in quickly while I announce our next webinar is going to be on July 29th, and it's called Bear Market Triggers and RSVP. RSVP stands for Recession, Shocks, Valuation, and Policy. Our speaker will be Tim Euchre, who is the Managing Director of PGIM, which is Prudential's investment management arm. So if you have not signed up for that webinar, please do. I know Danielle and Lisa have sent out invitations for that. I don't see any more questions, gentlemen. So first of all, on behalf of Agency One, I want to thank everybody that was on the call. Mitch, we can certainly get back to you on the LLC stuff. And thank you, gentlemen, for always participating with us on these webinars. We're very, very grateful for
It's
your
our
wisdom.
pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity, Gonzalo. It means a
Of
lot to me.
course. All
Thank you.
right. Goodbye,
Yes, I
everybody.
agree.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Yeah.